Hello, my name is Jeff Rolka. I want to thank you for checking out my video. Questions from comments number 8. Does it come off that I enjoy this? Yeah, I go through the comments, I answer as much as I possibly can. Every once in a while, actually quite frequently, I find something that I really want to talk about in video format. I think it's a really excellent question, and this one is really good. So, I'm not going to dilly-dally, I'm going to get right into this. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. I really appreciate it. It really helps the channel, and it'd be great if you'd do so if you haven't yet. There are lots of other ways you can support my channel too, and those are in the description. Hi, Jeff. First of all, thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed the bass and lower scales on this video. You have the most comprehensive, high quality, and complete channel on YouTube for singers. Thank you. I truly appreciate it and am humbled by your praise. Thank you. I have a question. I realize that I can sing all these exercises using my larynx resonator or without using it. I hope I am describing it well. If I use my larynx resonator, the sound is louder and a little more metallic. And if I do not use it, the sound is more rounded and clear. I don't know if this description will make sense to you. I'm a little confused about how I should, quote unquote, feel during these exercises, and maybe it is related to it, maybe it is not, in parentheses. I am confused about voice, piano, in testa, which in the video I mentioned voce, piena, in testa, and I'll get to that in a second. So that's in quotes. Also in quotes is mixed voice, and also in quotes too is belting. Are they related somehow? Any of those use the larynx resonator. Excuse me for my long and messy question. Thank you again for your help and hard work. A hug from Argentina. So great question. No need to put any caveats there. This is a great question. And hugs from California too. Thank you for the hugs from Argentina. So let's go from the bottom back to the top here. Do any of those types of things use the larynx resonator? Well, the larynx is part of the vocal apparatus, and as such, it is involved in the resonant properties of the voice. So if you think about the voice production as a system, you have the lungs, sacs of air. They're the fuel, so to speak. They're going to provide that subglottic air pressure that's going to go over the vocal folds. But that air goes through the vocal tract, and it goes through and over the larynx, through the larynx, then over the vocal folds, and then you get into the nasal pharynx, and then you're getting into like the oral cavity, the soft tissue of the oral cavity, and also the sinus cavities, and all that kind of stuff. So as a system, the larynx is absolutely part of the resonance of the system. And this brings us to my next point, which is, as for it being the primary or a component of the resonator system, or what the roles that it plays, there's a lot of different thoughts on that. And voice teachers don't always agree. And they don't always agree in very vocal, high volume kinds of ways, if you get what I mean. They can sometimes be contentious. So I tried to look up what I thought you were talking about here in calling it larynx resonator, or I think you described it as laryngeal resonance. That might be me regurgitating something that I read from one of my books. But there are some schools that indicate the larynx is the primary resonant surface in the vocal tract. I tend not to think of it that way. I tend to think of it all as a system that's working together. And what we are working to do with this system is cultivate the most amount of release. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that all the different parts are working in synergy. So each one is working just as much as is necessary for even, balanced phonation at a given range of your singing voice. So, if I'm here, that requires a certain balance of subglottic air pressure, of vocal fold adduction. The vowels that I choose require a certain height of the rear of the tongue in the oral cavity, and additionally the pharynx and the soft palate can be positioned as well to stimulate the kind of resonance that I think of in an even, well-produced vocal delivery. If I were doing something different, I might adjust those parameters or cue my ear into trying to create a certain affectation and go towards that affectation. Most of the small musculature, the vast majority of the small musculature that we are manipulating in the process of singing is beyond our direct conscious control. We have to try to develop a concept and cultivate the system so that the tissues can release and only do as much as they have to in order to give us the output that we are looking for. Now, voce piena in testa translates to the sound of chest voice in head, voce piena in testa. And that is the mode of phonation that I am mostly interested in working on myself, that I tend to teach most often, and am mostly setting you up for on this channel. And that is because that's probably one of the more difficult ways of going about it. And if you can do it, then you can most likely do the other ways of phonating, because you'll have developed the control and flexibility. So what is voce piena in testa? Hopefully that sounded pretty even. Hopefully it sounded like I just sang some scales back and forth. And hopefully you weren't terribly aware that I was crossing my secondo passaggio, going into my head voice at the top of the scale, and then coming back down to my chest voice in every single one of them. So I'm starting in my chest voice. I'm ascending the scale, going into my head voice, and coming back. That's voce piena in testa, the sound of chest voice in head. In the earlier or undeveloped stages of it, or as an affectation, the head voice can sound much headier, like you might expect it to sound. Woo, and I use a lot more air when I'm keeping the vocal fold not adducting quite as efficiently as it could. Another step beyond that too would be to separate the vocal fold a little bit, let some air seep over, and then you get that kind of falsetto sound, right? And by the time I get to D major, or I'm getting to an A natural on the top, leaking that much air to give you that falsetto tone production, it's hard for me to go up and down on one breath. Probably could have paused a little bit more in between the scales and gotten a better breath, but whatever. You get my point. Voce piena in testa is the sound of chest voice in head voice, and it is that balance that I primarily advocate for. If you develop that, you can certainly choose to belt if you wish. You can certainly choose, as I just demonstrated, to have a more head voice affectation, to have a falsetto kind of tone production. But voce piena in testa is a balanced mode of phonation. Ergo, it doesn't really tire you out. I mean, you might get physically tired, but it's not going to really tire the vocal mechanism the way that these other modes of phonation do. As such, especially for someone like me that sings a lot, both in video production, in my own personal artistic pursuits, and also in my teaching, the more that I can sustain my vocal health, the happier and better off I am. And so having that really good transition across the secondo passaggio can mitigate a lot of the fatigue, the wear and tear, and the other sorts of vocal maladies that one can experience when you are only using one of these other modes of phonation. This is in part why many people who only belt will frequently have to deal with fatigue issues. Now, many teachers of belting will indicate that you are in fact doing it incorrectly, if that is the case. I don't want to get into the quagmire that is the argument between head voice belting and voce piena and testa and all that other kind of stuff. Suffice to say, there's at least one instructor whose teachings I am aware of that talks about belting, but what they're teaching is making this transition. And belting, at least by definition of the books and the studies that I have done, is limiting phonation to the thyroarytenoid dominant musculature. So let's review the terms that you were asking about. Voce piena in testa, which I've now talked about pretty much at length. Mixed voice, I'm going to get to that. And belting. Belting, by the definition that I typically go by, is also called the call of the voice. And though I do not mean this in a disparaging way, it can come off sounding that way, but it is not my intent. It is only so that we convey understanding, which is that it's kind of like yelling. You are using a lot of engagement, a bit of airflow, quite a bit of force, and quite a bit of vocal fold engagement to produce ever higher pitches. I would stipulate that this is a self-limiting practice. In other words, there's only so high that you are going to force the thyroarytenoid musculature. The thyroarytenoid musculature is also the vocalis muscle. That's your chest voice. Thyroarytenoid dominant singing, chest voice. Vocalis muscle controls chest voice. Are they still in play in your head voice in voce piena in testa? Yes. But in your chest voice, that is your thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. And when you belt, you're trying to sing higher and higher by only using that musculature. And I would suggest to you that as long as you limit yourself to a major second above the secondo passaggio and below that, you'll probably avoid a lot of the fatigue and deleterious effects that are sometimes associated with belting. Go beyond that, and then it becomes a different matter. So belting is restricting your usage. You are sticking to the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice. And the idea here is to have consistency of tone. I would suggest to you that you can arrive at consistency of tone in a different fashion that will remove a lot of the fatigue issues from the equation for you, make your voice more sustainable. From my perspective, just what I love to do, I find it quite thrilling to sing through the zona di passaggio and over the secondo passaggio with the intent of creating voce piena in testa. Mixed voice. Unfortunately, this term, like so many other terms, gets used to mean a variety of different things. In the studies that I do, mixed voice is the space between the primo and secondo passaggios. So, for me, my primo passaggio starts like around C4, C sharp 4. It's not exactly mapped to the piano, but it's right in that zone. Above that point, I enter the zona di passaggio, the area of change. It is in this area where minute adjustments to my singing allow for a smooth transition across the secondo passaggio. The secondo passaggio for me is around F, F sharp, a perfect fourth above C, C sharp. That's the zona di passaggio. In my teaching, that can also be called the mix range. It is the place where you're mixing thyroarytenoid dominant singing and cricothyroid dominant singing. Now, a moment ago, we said thyroarytenoid dominant singing is your chest voice. Cricothyroid dominant singing is reflecting the elongation of the vocal fold. And yes, that's synonymous with head voice. Cricothyroid dominant singing and head voice are synonymous. But unfortunately, mixed voice has also been used to mean the area above the secondo passaggio. In other words, cricothyroid dominant singing can also be referred to mixed voice depending on whom you are speaking to. If you ask me, I'll try to keep it succinct in a lesson, but you get an answer kind of like that, where a bit of explanation and descriptions becomes kind of necessary in order to make sure that we get come to an understanding. So your question is incredibly on point. There's not a lot of consensus among singing schools about the usages of these terms. Falsetto can mean a range of voice or a mode of tone production. Head voice, kind of the same thing. Voce, piena in testa doesn't get tossed around a lot. Neither does thyroarytenoid dominant singing, and neither does cricothyroid dominant singing, and that's why I chose those terms. I mean, I didn't make them up, they're just in the textbooks that I study. But I specifically went with those terms if for no other reason than to start this conversation and to hopefully have people ask the question about what these things all mean. Because it's in coming to an understanding on your own part, by understanding the terms and what they mean, and by understanding who you're talking to, what they mean by using those terms, then you can really, get your voice in control and get what you want to get from your singing. I don't talk a lot about feel. You mentioned that in your question too, about feel, because physical experience is subjective. And too frequently in the history of vocal teaching, we've been told to place the sound here, feel it up front, feel it down low, feel it this way or that. And unfortunately, a lot of those descriptions have been perpetuated because they were useful for one person at one point in time. And when it worked for that individual, they passed it on. But it didn't necessarily work for the next couple of people. These feelings are very much subjective. You could feel it entirely differently than I feel it, yet we could be producing tone in a similar capacity in terms of efficiency and viable tone production. So I don't talk a lot about feels because ultimately it's subjective. And two, when you're really phonating efficiently, and I'm gonna tell you my feeling now, so take it all with a grain of salt. But when you're really phonating efficiently and everything is really balanced well, to me, it doesn't really feel like anything at all. I feel more like sound is resonating out of me, like I'm a bell that's been rung, rather than some type of engagement or shifting or any of that kind of stuff. I feel subtle shifts in things like that as I make my way across various registers, particularly as I get into the falsetto range of my voice, which is above B4, getting up there. It starts to feel, and this is very subjective, very woody. That probably doesn't mean much of anything, but it feels kind of wooden to me. And I suspect that this is in part due to the separation of the vocal fold and a dampening of that musculature, that I'm feeling that engagement as this sort of stalwart woodiness to the way that my voice is operating. So I avoid feelings. I will often talk about using mirrors and things like that. Visual confirmation of what you're doing can be just as or more helpful than thinking about the feelings of things. So get in front of a mirror. Another really great thing is biofeedback. So use your hands or whatever you can to place lightly on your person so that you can monitor what you are doing. If you put your hand here and you feel yourself scrunching your forehead while you're singing, having your hand there will make you aware of it, and you can work towards releasing that tension. Releasing that tension there will cascade down through the rest of your phonation and can make all of the systems work more harmoniously. So I hope that helps. I realize that in some respects I'm answering your question with more questions and without immediately giving you this particular specific thing as an answer. But I would suggest to you that the answers to your questions depends a lot on to whom you're speaking. And as far as that is concerned, I've certainly given you my concepts for these things and how I have studied them in the past and how I have found them, the study of them, to be most fruitful for myself and for my clients. So I do hope this helps. As always, my name's Jeff. Take really good care of your voices, enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.